From annihilation to negation, which is a more general operation, there is now only a step. All that is necessary is to represent the contrast of what is, not only with what has been, but also with all that might have been. And we might express this contrast as a function of what might have been, and not of what is. We must affirm the existence of the actual while looking only at the possible. The formula we thus obtain no longer expresses merely a disappointment of the individual. It is made to correct or guard against an error, which is rather supposed to be the error of another. In this sense, negation has a pedagogical and social character. Now, once negation is formulated, it presents an aspect symmetrical with that of affirmation. If affirmation affirms an objective reality, it seems that negation must affirm a non-reality equally objective and, so to say, equally real, in which we are both right and wrong. Wrong because negation cannot be objectified, insofar as it is negative. Right, however, in that the negation of a thing implies the latent affirmation of its replacement by something else, which we systematically leave on one side. But the negative form of negation benefits by the affirmation at the bottom of it. Bestriding the positive solid reality to which it is attached, this phantom objectifies itself. Thus is formed the idea of the void or of a partial not, a thing being supposed to be replaced, not by another thing, but by a void which it leaves, that is, by the negation of itself. Now, as this operation works on anything whatever, we suppose it performed on each thing in turn, and finally on all things in block. We thus obtain the idea of absolute nothing. If now we analyze this idea of nothing, we find that it is, at bottom, the idea of everything, together with a movement of the mind that keeps jumping from one thing to another, refuses to stand still, and concentrates all its attention on this refusal by never determining its actual position except by relation to that which it has just left. It is therefore an idea eminently comprehensive and full and comprehensive as the idea of all, to which it is very closely akin. How then can the idea of not be opposed to that of all? Is it not plain that this is to oppose the fool to the fool, and that the question, why does something exist, is consequently without meaning, a pseudo-problem raised about a pseudo-idea? Yet, we must say once more why this phantom of a problem haunts the mind with such obstinacy. In vain do we show that in the idea of an annihilation of the real, there is only the image of realities expelling one another endlessly, in a circle. In vain do we add that the idea of non-existence is only that of the expulsion of an imponderable existence, or a merely possible existence, by a more substantial existence, which would then be the true reality. In vain do we find in the sui generis form of negation an element which is not intellectual, negation being the judgment of a judgment, an admonition given to someone else or to oneself, so that it is absurd to attribute to negation the power of creating ideas of a new kind, namely ideas without content. In spite of all, the conviction persists that before things, or at least under things, there is nothing. If we seek the reason of this fact, we shall find it precisely in the feeling, in the social, and so to speak, practical element that gives its specific form to negation. The greatest philosophical difficulties arise, as we said, from the fact that the forms of human action venture outside their proper sphere. We are made in order to act as much as, and more than, in order to think. Or rather, when we follow the bent of our nature, it is in order to act that we think. It is therefore no wonder that the habits of action give their tone to those of thought, and that our mind always perceives things in the same order in which we are accustomed to picture them when we propose to act on them. Now, it is unquestionable, as we remarked above, that every human action has its starting point in a dissatisfaction, and thereby in a feeling of absence. We should not act if we did not set before ourselves an end, and we seek a thing only because we feel the lack of it. Our action proceeds thus from nothing to something, and its very essence is to embroider something on the canvas of nothing. The truth is that the nothing concerned here is the absence not so much of a thing as of a utility. If I bring a visitor into a room that I have not yet furnished, I say to him that there is nothing in it, yet I know the room is full of air, but as we do not sit on air, the room truly contains nothing that at this moment for the visitor and for myself counts for anything. In a general way, human work consists in creating utility, and as long as the work is not done, there is nothing that we want. Our life is thus spent in filling voids, which our intellect conceives under the influence, by no means intellectual, of desire and of regret, under the pressure of vital necessities, and if we mean by void an absence of utility and not of things, we may say, in this quite relative sense, that we are constantly going from the void to the full. Such is the direction which our action takes. Our speculation cannot help doing the same, and naturally it passes from the relative sense to the absolute sense, since it is exercised on things themselves and not on the utility they have for us. Thus is implanted in us the idea that reality fills a void, and that nothing, conceived as an absence of everything, preexists before all things in right, if not in fact. It is this illusion that we have tried to remove by showing that the idea of nothing, if we try to see it in that of an annihilation of all things, is self-destructive and reduced to a mere word, and that if, on the contrary, it is truly an idea, then we find in it as much matter as in the idea of all.